Okay, Liminal Village, welcome back. Our next lecture will be Biohacking from the maker movement to do DIY labs worldwide, potentials and practicalities. Hacker culture began with computer programmers in America and since then has spread to other fields such as electronics and hardware and more recently to biology. Biohacking involves a lot of learning and reading, but can produce attractive results. The talk that we will have right now will discuss certain innovations and products that have commercial values and started as hacks in a community laboratory. Keenan Pinto is a bioengineer and molecular biologist by profession and a nature-loving explorer by personality. He's actively involved in engaging the DIY biohack community in Denmark as well as in India. Please join me in welcoming Keenan.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for this presentation on biohacking. I was really pleased to hear when Boom Festival had AI and hacking as the theme for the Liminal Village, because the more we advance, the more we come across such things and we form opinions and we begin to think about this. So I think it's important to have people talk about things that we interact with, and hopefully they may help us understand them better and decide the way we think about things without making a preconception. So, as you heard, I'm a molecular biologist and I've worked with DNA. I'm an engineer, so I work a bit with electronics as well. I moved to Copenhagen from India about a year and a half ago, and I found a small community of people that worked out of a basement. These people they were not all engineers, they were all people from different backgrounds, but they all came together for a common purpose, to learn, to teach others, and to discuss about topics which were maybe out of their control. Maybe they wanted to make a change and they didn't know how, but they met people who had similar thoughts, and this is how the sort of mini hacker communities were born. And today I'm going to tell you a bit more about biology and how people are using biology as a toolkit to do things, and how they're going up against large corporations who try and suppress us. But we make it work, and let's see how. I wanted to focus on a few points about how biohacking came to be, where it originated, what people are doing, and how they're doing it, because not everyone has the finances to do such big, creative projects. So, just to know where it began. We hear about hacking and we think it's this criminal with a computer sitting behind trying to break into banks, stealing passwords, but in actuality, the word hack is something really genuine. I'm sure on the internet, if you are on social media, you see these things called life hacks. It uses the word hack because it's a creative solution to a problem that might not have something you can buy from a department store. If you can't buy it, well then, should it be that you can't do it? Well, there are people who try and put forward their own ways of how to do things. As you can see on the slides, people make clothes out of old clothes. Some of the designers that you see here have modified clothing to levels which I find completely fascinating. I don't personally understand the vision required to see that in fashion, but it's beautiful. You also have some simple household things using Legos. But today I'm going to talk about something a bit more technical. The word hack actually originated in MIT in Massachusetts in the US with a railroad club. There were enthusiasts who thought that train systems were really fun and they were interesting, and model trains have been around for a long time. You buy them for your kids and things like that. And these people would play around with the switchboards and try and figure out new ways to plan the routes of these trains. And they would call a really successful program a hack because it was a way to get to the fastest point or reroute some traffic. And that's where it started being used. So from model trains to security threats, I don't know how we got lost along the way. Well, maybe part of it had to do with software, because it began with software. And somewhere around the 1970s, there was a shift. People from the Railroad Club moved into the Department of Artificial Intelligence. And there was one guy who felt that software, it's computers and software, for a lot of people, they're like an extension of their body. Like we would drive a car or ride a bike, you feel like you need to have control of these things. And if you're not in control of software, then you can't know exactly what you're doing and how much of an effect it could have. So Richard Stallman was one of the people who actually felt that software needed to be free. And there have been conversations, there's a documentary about his experiences where he received calls from Bill Gates from Microsoft saying that you people, you're doing this hobbyist and these developer things and you don't pay for the software. So technically you're pirates. And maybe that's where the sort of thing of not paying for software at that point. So there's a lot of ideology that comes into place. What do you believe in? Do you believe that things should be free? Or whether, I don't know, whether you need to pay? Of course you need to pay, but depends on what you can do with it. If you pay for something, can you modify it? Can you change it to suit your needs a bit better? And this one statement that he made, libre not gratis, kind of describes it, because in the English language we have the word free, which means a lot of things. But in other languages, libre means free as in freedom, to use it how you please. Well, gratis just means a free, not paid version of something. So he was pushing it that software should be free, it should be open, and allow you to make changes. And I personally think this did a lot of good for the world, because further down he wrote a license called the GNU license. We have Creative Commons that I'm sure that some of you may have heard at some point. It's how you can release your art, release your sound, release your presentations even, and have people use them. And there's a legal framework where you can actually, if people are using your work to make money off it, they have to give you credit for it and sometimes even pay you back or pass it on just like how you passed it on. And this helped a lot of open source software develop, some of which you may be familiar with. I'm not sure if people use Android on their mobile phones, but Android is based on Linux, which is open source. So Android, based on that, is open source. You always hear these talks about how Apple is closing their systems, whereas Android is a more open system. That's because it's based on something that was open to begin with. And some of the others here at Firefox, it's not that they have to give it to you for free, but the fact that you can look into the code, see what they did, and then maybe derive your own, make it better, that's what the whole movement was about. Another concept that I want to introduce is DIY culture. I'm sure this festival is a beautiful example of how DIY, doing it yourself at home with tools, is inspirational. You can see the artwork, the decor. A lot of people have put a lot of interest, and some of them have made these things by hand or using tools. And that's what the DIY movement gave to the world. It showed people that you could be creative. A lot of people work with wood. I myself work with wood, but not using my hands because I'm not that good with power tools. But you can create structures. These are a really bad example, because when you look around you, you see some stuff that's been made, which it tweaks the mind to understand how people can make such things from materials that normally look so plain. And of course, metal is a bit more trickier than wood. Not all metal installations are boxes or products that you find that you can buy. Some people actually have a lot of motivation besides making things that do something, like artwork. This is something that I could never even imagine coming out of simple hubcaps from cars, but there are a lot of artists around the world who are using spare parts to make creative installations. If you use the internet to learn, Instructables is a website where you can practically build everything that you want. You would almost always find some instruction of how to make it and do it yourself. So now we have two big movements. One is open source, which feels that technology and ideas should be shared among people and that it should be free for them to modify. You have licenses in place for this. And you have do-it-yourself culture, which is emphasizing the fact that instead of waiting for someone to make something that you can buy, if you need it now and you sort of have the ideas or you know people who could help you do it, then do it yourself. And before, it's easy to say, but now they're making tools to actually do this. The open source hardware movement is giving people tools to play around with electronics. If you see some of the really fancy LED light work that's done on the dance temple for the decor, you can learn to do that and try and do that yourself using some of the open source electronic products that are available now. And they're actually quite cheap, maybe about 20 euros. You can buy something to make it work. I use this machine when I'm working with wood. It's a CNC machine. And this design is actually released open source. So not only can you make whatever you want if you're a designer, you can also modify this machine to do different things. It doesn't have to just cut wood. And this is how the people who made the device have released it to the world. I don't know if you've seen this, but someone has made a farming machine that actually replaces the part that cuts the wood with a fountain that sprays water on plants, and they can grow a mini garden using a machine that was used to cut wood. So it's that kind of creativity that gives people the ability and the learning to actually do things that they were not intended for. If this machine said you can only cut wood with it, that would kind of put people in a box. And this is what hacking is all about. It's getting out of that box. If any of you have heard of 3D printing, it's been used in the industry for really, really long to make models and prototypes of things. And it was always that you had to design your thing and send it to a shop that would produce it for you. And then a couple of scientists and engineers sat down and they realized that this machine is not that fancy. It just uses a couple of motors and a bit of programming. And what they did is they hacked the 3D printer and made a model that you can replicate for maybe 100 euros or less, and that could be yours. You can build that. The instructions for this are all online. It's called a RepRap, and it really helps to kind of make ideas come to life. It's something that gives you a perspective to see and feel what you've been designing on a computer or what you've been thinking about in your mind for really long. And that's the other image of people pushing technology. Sadly, that's not open source yet, but we're hopeful that people will put this kind of effort into making this open source as well. Laser cutting. This thing is really awesome because if you don't know about it and you've never tried it, it can make even the most complex designs that you have in your mind or you have in your artwork come to life. And a lot of the decor is laser cut here. It's laser cut and then assembled. So if you have something in your head that you think could be beautiful, maybe sketch it out, maybe do it on Photoshop or Illustrator and get it laser cut. And then you have your own product which you've made by yourself that people might actually find really valuable. Sometimes it's difficult. It's easy for me to say, you know, go out and do these things. But not always can we afford to spend the money on buying materials, using services from places. But there's something to help you out along the way. There's this thing called Fab Labs. Again, this was an initiative by MIT to sort of give people with creative minds a place where you can come together and do things. These places are usually stocked with all the machines that you would need to make products. When I say products, I don't mean something you would sell, something that you would maybe keep for yourself, make happy, like a necklace, things like that. And usually, it's free to enter a space like this. It's free to use the machines. I personally use a lot of these machines for free. And they have only one criteria, which means you don't have to, you can't do it if it's commercial. If you're doing it for a project, if you're making a piece of woodwork for your loved ones or your friends, it's perfectly fine. But if you're planning on selling something, then you usually have to go somewhere more commercial. And these Fab Labs actually set the standard because not everything is so focused on design. These are focused a bit more on architecture and design. But you have maker spaces where people like the space I found, they sit in basements usually with a lot of machines and a lot of crap that people throw out. If, for example, a company is throwing away a lot of old machines, they got a new rack of computers. Where does that electronic waste go to? It goes to a dumpster, right? Well, we don't feel like it needs to go to a dumpster. It actually goes into a space like this where people can take out some of the parts that are useful and maybe use them for future projects. If you remember the company Nokia, it's no longer around. So eventually, when they closed their doors, they had a lot of stuff that could be used again. And Nokia made a donation. We didn't have to say anything. They just said, we're not going to use this. Can you take it off our hands? We took a lot of stuff from Nokia, and it has helped fuel a lot of open source projects around Denmark, at least. So we see this as a way to not only reduce, reuse, and recycle, but one of the R's that no one speaks about is repair. Because if you repair something that can give you functionality for the next year or so, you've automatically upgraded the shelf life of trash. These were the tools that I was talking about. This was an Italian company that came up with the idea that we need to make electronics really accessible in a digital age where everything around us uses electricity and uses these circuits. A lot of people don't understand how this works exactly. So they built a small chip. It's about the size of a credit card, and it allows you to control lights, sensors, other forms of electronics, and it lets you be the master and decide, okay, at 10 o'clock, I want to turn on all these lights, and I want them to be of a certain color because my plants require lights only of red and blue color. So instead of wasting electricity on white light, you can program them to have a certain kind of light. This is another open source device. It's called the Raspberry Pi. Again, it's a credit card sized device. But this one is a bit more powerful. It's a computer which allows you to write programs. So usually, at least for me, when I started with programming, I felt like my Mac, which is so nice, I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to cause any problems. If I write a program that's going to crash my computer, I lose all my data. This is kind of like a safety net because you can write whatever you want. If it gets corrupted, you just pull out the memory card and it's as good as new. So this is used a lot in schools because it costs about, I think, 30 pounds for a full computer. So it's helping students and teachers explain programming to the younger generations. An example of this is drones. I don't know, I saw a drone flying around here somewhere at the festival. Most of these are really expensive, which you can't buy. I'm personally trying to make a drone for myself, and it's possible. You can look up Instructables and get to know about this. So people are expanding on their creativity, making gaming systems, making systems that automatically water their plants only when they need water. Because, of course, we have this resource that we are wasting by overusing it. So the automatic watering plants were one of really cool projects that I personally liked. And this was an electronics project that made it a bit more commercial. They actually sell this right now, but the reason I was really interested is that it gives you a way, it's an armband. It allows you to control the electronics in your environment using the power of your body. It senses the electronic impulses in your muscle and lets you control lights, sounds. So I think this could be really, really exciting for future performances of dance and vision, which could actually, transcend what we do now. It could be triggers for presentations. I wouldn't have to use the keyboard anymore. And this is what's been going on in the world right now, if you're cued into the right things. But how do we relate this to biology? Well, in biohacking is more of a word and activity, what you do. The people who do it are usually called citizen scientists because it's a kind of science that really doesn't need you to have a PhD or a really advanced degree or a really advanced lab. What people think when they hear biohacking, a lot of responses I've got is that, do you plug a computer into the back of your neck and then start to reprogram people? That's not true. It's just using tools, different tools. Like the credit card size computer was for electronics and programming. We use the same It's just a bit different. We involve life in our study. We study life and how it can be used, how bacteria and fungus can be used to make our lives a little easier, how to clean up things, how to not produce as much waste, and how to, and this is the tricky part, take away power from a lot of the corporations that have been controlling this science for a really long time. From the time I got educated in this science, the word Monsanto has been shoved in your face, saying that these guys have ruined a lot for the study of genetics and things like that. So since the time I started learning about this, it's all been about how do you avoid or how do you fix or how do you do damage control for people who don't really care about the environment before considering to do a project. This is just an example, much like the credit card sized computer, but this is usually what you would find in a biology lab, whether it's high tech or low tech. You're going to find a machine that's like an oven that grows bacteria and microorganisms inside. You're going to find these pipettes that allow you to move small liquids around. And I'm talking in the levels of microliters. And this is because bacteria are so tiny that you don't really need a full glass of them to do something. And, well, programmers have code which they read and understand, and they can also write code. In biology, we also have a code. It's our DNA. Everything has DNA in them. It's their internal programming of sorts. We follow our DNA. We get it from our parents. We give it to our children. It's the code of life. And this is something, if you can read and understand this, you can really dig into a lot of the problems that we are doing to the environment, to ourselves. We're causing diseases without even thinking about them. And sometimes it can help to understand this a bit better. Some people also use it to make money off things, and that's when the consequences and the ethics get suppressed a bit, because we see with large corporations that the environmental aspect, money, yes. So how do we change that? And this is what biohacking aims to do. We learn about technology, we study it, and we figure out how this can make minimal impact, if not no impact on the environment. And if it's making something go bad, do we really need to do that project? Can we just avoid it and think of something else? Right? Because a lot of people think, oh, I have this great idea. It's the only way to solve something. But the more you talk about it, the more you discuss it with people, people can give you insight into a way to work around it and not just follow down, this is my path. Usually, when new communities come up, the scientific community always tries to discredit them and say that these people are just fooling around or they're messing about. Nothing serious is going to come out of it. It's just a bunch of hobbyists trying to do garage experiments. Well, the movement started somewhere in 2010, and by 2013, big publications, big magazines that only publish scientific papers, like The Scientist, said that, well, it's high potential. These people, they actually know a lot and they care about what they're doing. So in a way, it puts them at an advantage because we self-police ourselves. We moralize the values that we have in our ethics, and then we think about those to begin with. So it's great that real scientific publications think of biohacking in the same way. This is an example of the kind of lab that you would find if you go to a university, right? You have all these fancy resources, you have an extremely clean environment, you usually have a really senior scientist who would probably not talk to you because you're young and you're a junior. Well, that's changing a bit right now because the same kind of work you can do in a lab like this, all the experiments can be done in a garage lab just like this. If you know and you understand the science, or if you want to learn the science, more importantly, you couldn't enter a lab like the one before if you were an artist. They would just say, yeah, you have nothing to do here. Well, in biohacking labs, you can walk in as an artist, and we've had many who've come by and say that I have a concept for a bio installation. I want to make living art, and we help them do that. They don't necessarily need to know everything about the science. They just need to know how to use it responsibly and how to figure out how to minimize their footprint. And there are a lot of successful projects, some of which I will discuss a bit later. Yeah, this is another thing. The equipment usually costs a lot of money, a lot. And I'm saying that if I had to buy even one of these pieces of equipment myself, I would never be able to do my entire project because the finances would be done right there. All of this has been manufactured and made by a guy in Switzerland. He runs a lab called Gaudi Labs. He's just used recycled wood and a laser cutter to make these. They don't look extremely professional, but they do exactly the same thing, and they cost about 1/10 the price of something you would buy from a company. So before you did have a space to do science, now you have a biohacking lab. Before you said who's going to buy the equipment, well now it costs around 10 times less the price that it did before. So it really kind of gives you a bit of motivation to think, maybe I could do this? I don't know. Well, yes, you can. Because this is one of the machines I used every day in my master thesis. It's a machine that copies DNA and allows you to learn a bit more about it, about genes that can cause an effect in humans, in bacteria. And this was about $6,000 before. So if you had to buy one machine for $6,000, I think the affordability of the project is pretty dead at that point. The people who made this manufactured it for $599 initially, and now it's about $650. But this does exactly the same thing. So if you ever thought about getting your genes analyzed to find out what you're going to pass on to your children, what you received from your parents, where does your family tree actually go? These are one of the machines that can help you do that, and now most labs can help you do it for a small amount of money. So I don't think there has been any more development on this machine further on after that, but this made an impact in our community. The Hackteria Lab. Hackteria.org was a creative community set up by designers and artists who wanted to work with biology. And this was set up by 3 people and has now become a global network. It's really inspiring because sometimes we have a curiosity to do things and we're not really sure about how to do them. And tutorials are nice, you can find websites, but a lot of the times they're focused on different things. Well, Hackteria focuses specifically on biology and electronics and helping you make machines that can help you do your work. It also provides inspiration for projects where you think that, okay, I need something like this, but not exactly what's on the tutorial of this website. It gives you an understanding of how to modify it, how to make it your own. And they do a lot with biological art. They actually do workshops in different countries in the world. They've done them in some developed nations where you have a bit more technology. They've also done them in Indonesia, sitting on the ground under a tree. So it's really kind of showing you that all parts of society are invited to work with this. It's not an elitist atmosphere where you come in and people are kind of give you the cold shoulders. You're always welcome with a warm handshake and people saying, so what are you going to hack today? And people want others to try this. So it's a lot more open than conventional science. But of course, sometimes if you want to do something in science, you need the authentic protocol from that old guy who made it 50 years ago. And sometimes you may not know how to find it, right? Well, open wetware, they call it wetware because you work with liquids. It gives you the protocols that scientists are using in their labs, which sometimes they don't want to share. This is a bit where the word hacking comes in because people who believe in this notion and have done it before, they say, oh, this protocol, I'm just going to spend the time, write it down, and keep it open so that if anyone ever wants to use it again, they just go back and check it out. And this is how it spreads. If I know how to do something, but I sit at home and only use it to myself, that's not really helping anyone except me. So in this way, you sort of get to pass on your knowledge and also leave a small footprint behind, in a way, in the internet. So this was one of the projects that I made. If anyone has heard of spirulina, it's a kind of algae that's super nutritious. It's coming up as one of the newest superfoods, which has a lot of protein. and other things that are required, omega acids as well. And this grows in all salty lakes, some even not salty lakes, so marine and freshwater environments. And people grow this industrially, of course. They make spirulina powder, which you can use in smoothies and milkshakes. But a lot of people have expressed their intention of using fresh spirulina or fresh algae, and they want to grow it themselves. And some people, maybe they don't know that you need to keep this stuff clean because you're eating it, so they try and grow it outdoors, which can get contaminated because of pollution. So I thought maybe I could give up a design. I had studied this before. I didn't have as much fun studying it as I did making the project. So we made a mini bioreactor which allows you to grow your algae in a tank. I use plastic right now, acrylic, but I'm trying to make it glass so that there's no contamination that comes in from the plastic, and you only get pure spirulina to eat when you're done growing them. This was a project that was done in California by a group from Counterculture Labs. It's a printer, much like the 3D printer you saw earlier, but the one I showed you earlier uses plastic, right? It says it's biodegradable. I hope it really is. And it's not going to be as fast. It's probably going to be there for 6 years in the landfill before it even starts to degrade. But you can also make plastic from bacteria, and that degrades a lot faster. So what this group in California did is that they figured out how to make bioplastic, which degrades in maybe 2 or 3 years. It's a much shorter time span. And they also made a printer that's especially caters to this kind of input. It's a biological plastic that goes in, and you can make a structure that's made of bioplastic. And usually with 3D printed models, you almost always throw them out. So this is kind of reducing the footprint we create from plastic by making it more degradable and with a shorter lifetime in our environment. This is something that really fascinates me. This is an image, or these two images are of a glass dish or a plastic dish in which you usually grow bacteria or fungus. And when I did it, and when a lot of people do it, you kind of just dump it in there, and it just grows in these small blobs or circles. But a lot of people see a lot more in this. The one to the left is by Maria Kobo. You can see that she's used colorful bacteria. There are some strains which, after you grow them, they produce a color. So that's living art right there. This is captured at the perfect time when they're not overgrown, because usually they will kind of cover the whole plate. So it's the perfect stage of growth. And the one on the right, it's also really interesting because the colors you see there, they're fluorescent, so that's under ultraviolet light. But how they made this is not using fluorescent markers. They've used bacteria, and they've put in the genes of proteins that make this fluorescent light, and they've then cultivated these and then grown them. That bit of art probably took a good 2.5 years to materialize by actually doing all the science behind it and then putting it forward in an artistic piece. Professor Roger is a Nobel laureate, and this is one of the papers he presented for this science that they did. It was like an artistic outcome of science that went on for a couple of years. I didn't talk a lot about human hacking, because I think there's another lecture after this that discusses it in a bit more detail. But a friend of mine, he has a vision that you don't need to use credit cards. I don't know how many of you know about Bitcoin, but if you've heard about Bitcoin, it's something really, I don't know, unique, you could say, because it kind of bypasses. Right now, you still have a payment gateway which tracks where you get the Bitcoin from, but pretty much once you have it, you can use it however. And that's led to a lot of good things, also not some good things. But BioPay is a really interesting idea where you get a small implant in your hand, and this is completely harmless. They put this in a biodegradable, not biodegradable, but a biosafe material, which doesn't cause any damage to the human body. You can get it implanted right there because it has nothing to do with your body. It kind of just sits there, and it's like a chip that allows you to do something with a technology called NFC. And we use that to get on the train if you use a card, to beep your entry on a train. That's the same technology that you could use now. So, yeah. As part of this movement, we not only help people learn, but we try and go places with our ideas. Some people like the fact that bacteria can glow. We help them do workshops. A friend of mine actually went to the marina where they get fish in, because instead of buying the bacteria from some company online, she went out and you can find it on the gills of some marine fish. So she actually went digging for fresh fish and found bacteria on their gills which can glow, and then did a workshop on it. This is one of the workshops that we did recently. It's based on DNA extraction. If you've ever watched CSI or some detective show, they always talk about catching a criminal based on his DNA, and then they take a cheek swab, and then they go to some office or some lab, and then they find out, oh, who is this guy? Is he really the criminal? And that's by analyzing the DNA. So we were kind of showing people how you can do the same thing with no lab. You could practically sit down right here and do this workshop as well. It's super easy, uses kitchen chemicals. And my friend Sweta, who's sitting right there, she's a designer. She never studied biology, but she's the one conducting that workshop just by learning about it for a few weeks. So it kind of goes to show that anyone can do this, and you can actually make a lot of people happy. We got really great reviews. They said that we need to do things like this a lot more, especially for children who feel like biology is a bit tricky, electronics is a bit easier. Now we get a bit funky. So this was a workshop organized by Alice Vandelpoor and Teresa Valentova. And as the tagline says, this is a workshop where you make yogurt out of bacteria that you find in the female vagina. Yeah, so it's creative, and also it shows you a bit about science, because if you know how bacteria work, they can be found anywhere. There were some guys who wanted to do this workshop too, but of course it wasn't possible through the vagina. You can do it from your toenails. The human toenail has a lot of bacteria under your toes, so if you have long toenails and you cut your toenails, you can scrape off what's below them and still do this workshop. So all the guys managed to do it as well. Uh, we got a lot of newspaper coverage because of this workshop. So just like the makerspaces and the labs we spoke about before, where you can do programming and electronics, there are some big labs that are set up for biology as well. This one is a bit better funded than ours. It's based in California, and there's a lot of people with money in California, so donations are a bit easier. This lab is a community space. You can enter whoever you are, sit down, chat with the people who own it, and then say, yeah, I want to use your space. If you don't want a desk and you don't want a mini office, I think it's free. But if you would like to maybe do a bit more commercial project, because we don't mind that as well, everyone needs to make money somehow. If you have a commercial project, you can actually pay them to get space to keep your desk. So this could become your office. GenSpace in New York is one of the first labs to be formed. It was actually founded by scientists, really well-known scientists who felt that maybe there's something to this movement. Maybe we could do a lot more if we spread our knowledge instead of kind of going down the route of patents and keeping things closed. And for a very long time, they were considered dangerous. People said that there's no... How do you control what goes on in these labs? And how do you understand who the people are? Everyone has good intentions. Some of them maybe not so under the surface. And that's a very interesting thing about these labs. I'll talk about the ethical part a bit later. But they fought through it, and now they're one of the spaces which actually pushes a lot of new projects out for the East Coast of the US. In London, they have another hackerspace somewhere around, I'm not sure where in London it is, but it's another open space. And these were one of the few countries who started to move fast. because you need to get this up and running. It takes money, it takes time, and everyone who works at these spaces usually does not get paid. I don't get paid to do this. I go out and talk about these things and welcome new people in every bit of time that I have because I believe in it, but it's not paid for. So sometimes forgive us if we don't reply as fast. Um, this image is from 2012, and you can see a lot of red dots which depict biohacking labs in different countries. That's in 2012. I can probably say with good conviction that this has doubled, if not a little less than doubled from then. And if this many people are actually thinking about doing something unique, making a change, maybe it's possible, right? Well, it certainly is, because I found projects that are started in, at least this one was started in Switzerland, and now is taken up by another group in Berlin. And what they do is that they go back and forth. It's exactly like people do in conventional labs, established labs. It's exactly the way people do it there. They have collaborations. One thing that's a bit unique about this is the ownership, because a lot of people are not doing these projects to be in charge of them. The idea behind it is to give it to the public for them to take it forward. But sometimes people take your work and then they can misrepresent it, and you feel like it's not the best way in which your work was taken forward. So they give you guidelines. These two have set up this device, was patented by a company called Illumina, which is big in the bioscience sphere. And because it's patented, usually people think that they're not allowed to work with these sciences or this technology. And here's where a bit of the piracy comes in. We don't really give a shit about that. So if you have a patent and you think it's really awesome, there are people out there who are going to hack your patent. Maybe they won't make money off it, but they will try. And I think if you have a patent, then you shouldn't feel bad because, well, people are actually using your work, unless you've sold it to a really big company and then they come after every small person who tries it. But we haven't seen anything of that sort. This is something that is really interesting. The iGEM competition, it stands for International Genetically Engineered Machine. Sounds a bit skeptical, right? This is right now a movement that started in the US and has spread to all parts of the world. And it's especially focused on people who are in universities, because we feel that people are usually creative to their maximum at this age, and then when they get into offices and work culture, sometimes that creativity is suppressed. I personally haven't been part of this because I found out about it much after I graduated. But what's unique is you're giving young people tools to play with. They, of course, are very creative, but you have to focus the way they think. So if you go and tell someone who's 16 years old, okay, here's a lab, here's technology, and here's everything you need to do something, you never know which path that person can take. So it becomes part of the entire initiative to speak about biosafety, to speak about ethics, to give examples of the crazy shit that's been done before and what it's ruined for the world. So when you go into subject focusing on people have really messed stuff up before, you kind of don't want to be like them. Right now, one of the most well-paid jobs I could get is working at Monsanto, but that's not the choice I make in life. And this is what you're trying to show people or youngsters, that there are different choices. You can use technology in a safe way, considering, does my project have an effect on the world? Does it really need to have that effect? And if you're focusing on this at the age of 16, I'm sure that when you grow, you're probably going to take this along with you and think about these points. That's how many people did this competition last year. They're young kids. And I can't even get a number on that, right? So imagine if the people who caused a lot of the problems were trained in this kind of culture. Maybe they would have second-guessed, I don't know, we can always hope, but maybe they would have second-guessed before releasing GMOs without any concern about them. But there's hope that the students or the youngsters of our generation can actually make educated choices and sometimes maybe even correct the mistakes of the past. As I said before, security is a big issue. So you find that a lot of the organizations that are looking at big topics like safety, for example, the FBI in the US was really interested in biohacking. We don't know why they were interested, whether they just wanted to keep track of who these people are and what they're capable of and what they can do. But they had a joint conference with the DIY Bio organization, and everyone's names went down on the list, but yeah, there's a lot of people coming up that aren't on this list, and they focused it in a nice way, saying that you have to know the power of what you're doing, so be responsible. I don't know how far that's gone, whereas keeping track, keeping tabs. Super. Another conference that's happening this year is Biohack the Planet. Again, groups of people getting together and thinking about how they can make a change. It doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, but change is always good. Ethics and regulation is something that is at the core of everything. I was at a conference 2 months ago where everyone from conventional science said, no, we can't do this. It's not safe. And I actually believed them. I said, this kind of technology should not be released into the hands of even the big corporations. Because, I mean, a patent is good for two things. One, it keeps a technology underground if you don't sell it. And right now, there's tech that's coming out that could do a lot of damage. And the first thing they think of is, how do we stop people from using this? And for once, I can say that it's good that they have thought about this much before people start to do things. So ethics and regulation is a big part. We always screen people in our labs before they come in. We have a coffee or a beer and just get to know them, their past, what they do. It's not an interview of sorts, but in a way it is, because you get to know them on a personal level. We don't care what education they have, what background, but who they are as a person can usually determine the kind of work that they do. So ethics right on top for biohackers, because if anything goes wrong, FBI is going to be like, we told you so, right? And then that's not good. Crowdfund your research. If everyone heard of Kickstarter, right? Kickstarter has a lot of projects. People put money. You get something in the mail some months. Maybe you don't get it. This is how you fund science. If you think a project is good, you can pay for it to happen. Real vegan cheese. I've heard I'm running out of time, so maybe not too much information. People have found out how to stop using cows for milk, and they produce milk, the milk protein in a bacteria. This is a lot safer because, well, you can screen. Cows use antibiotics. They inject cows with these antibiotics. We don't know where it goes, how it comes into our bodies, into our kids. This is actually made pure. It's just the protein. They made milk out of it by diluting it, and then they made cheese. Great project. Was also part of the iGEM competition. There's a company in France that came out of a biohacker space. It's called Pili. They basically make pigments. We get colors from a lot of plants, and bacteria can be used to produce these colors. So people don't have to grow a field of plants. They can actually grow food in that, and you can get the color through bacteria. One of the biggest initiatives I've seen is open source insulin. Insulin is needed by people who have diabetes. It's also controlled by two really big companies in the world who license this out to smaller companies to make it. They also control the price of this. There's no, just like you can find a paracetamol made by any company and things like that, it's not the same for insulin. So you're at the mercy of two companies to dictate the price. People are trying to avoid this by making insulin open source so they can provide it to small companies, smaller countries at a cheaper price. Well, what next, right? We've been talking about biohacking and all these abstract ideas. I don't know how clear you can see this picture. It's one of the more popular statements in the biohacking community. It says, we have always been biohackers. And to explain this a bit, I mean, if you've ever made bread in your life or if you've ever made cheese, you use microorganisms to make this. You use yeast in bread and you use some kind of bacteria in cheese making. If you've made cheese, you probably have an understanding of biology. Or if you didn't, well, you did without knowing it, and it might be easier to get into this stuff than you think. Here are some of the websites references: diybio.org. It's 10-second click. Click it in your computer and figure out what's going on. If you're interested, can maybe pass these on a bit more, but these are the people who are doing great things and whose work I've presented along the way in my presentation. And I think that it's time for me to open the floor to some questions. Um, we were also supposed to have a mini workshop where you can do the bit of DNA extraction we spoke about, get it out from your cheek cells. We're probably going to sit by at the back while there's the break, and if you want to do something like this, then maybe you could just come chat with us. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for this very insightful talk. In the world of 3D printers, everyone is scared about printing guns. What is the equivalent in the biohacking world?
Printing guns?
Yeah, the big fear that everyone has, that what could go wrong. So what is the equivalent for your universe?
So in Europe, we're not allowed to work with GMOs. In the US, they are. And if you're working with these organisms, sometimes it's a bit troublesome because it's under regulation. So we're worried mainly about people. If someone comes in and says, oh, I have this advanced degree and I have this cutting edge project I want to work on, they seem really fine to you. You engage with them, you get to know them, and if they start to misuse the equipment, right, they can produce, it's technology that's powerful. So if you come in and you engineer a strain that spreads, or if you make a plant that grows really fast, right, that could be an invasive species. So there are worries. Usually with the equipment and the making the electronics part, not so much. No one makes harmful stuff. But with genetics, we are a bit skeptical of who we let play with such stuff and what they do with it.
Yeah, hello. I had a question about regulation because, yeah, you said in Europe there is regulation, so you need a license to start a lab there. Um, well, in the US you don't need it, or
Well, to be honest, you will not go to jail if you did it in the US. The labs that are established, they have got licenses because it's a good way to go. It looks a bit, not looks, but it is a bit more professional because you care about these things. Usually the licenses are based on the fact that you have the ability to do damage control.
Yeah.
So if something goes wrong, the license just means that you have all the tools in place to clean up something if it spills, to take care of any harm that could have been caused to the body. But mainly in these labs, you don't work. If you work with something that can cause a problem, you're not considered a biohacker. There are other words that you are called, but I don't want to use them right now. So, yeah.
Hi there. Thanks very much for the interesting presentation. In the world of computer hacking, there's white hat hackers and black hat hackers. And the white hat hackers, much like yourselves, sort of have quite noble interests. And the black hats, maybe they just want to watch the world burn. Is there any sort of concern that in the world of biohacking, there might be people with sort of nefarious intents that could want to cause damage?
Yeah, usually this is always the case, but I know a lot of black hat hackers who don't. They would be black hats, but they kind of just fool around with people. They don't. They're again among that. There's levels, right? People want to rob banks, and there's people who want to make fun of someone on Facebook. So what level of black hat are you, right? In biohacking, if you are one person who wants to do damage, you are fighting an uphill struggle because, first of all, you have to have equipment to do this. Almost everything requires the equipment, so you need a space. And if you have evil intentions, it's probably going to show because of what you ask for. If you say, oh, I need to use this machine and I need this specific strain of bacteria I need to work on. The moment you say something like that, it's a buzzword, right? Why would you want to work with that? And then the deeper you get, you understand people's intentions. I haven't heard of people doing any damage with something like this just yet. It's still a nascent community. It started somewhere around 2009, 2010. We're always afraid of the equivalent of black hat hackers. And the good part is that usually you end up knowing them. When I entered the scene, I probably knew 3 people. Now I know about 35 who are pushing front-end projects. And you have to be highly skilled and with real determination to do harm to actually do something like this. And most likely you need to buy chemicals from or some kind of enzyme or something from a manufacturer. These companies also have regulations. If you go in and you say, oh, I want to go and buy this toxic substance, I can't make it, I need to buy it. So if you buy something from an online portal, it will raise a flag to them. And then the authorities in your area might be alerted to the fact that this person is buying this chemical. We haven't shipped it out, but maybe you should check up on the reason as to why they're ordering it. So there are safety nets put into place. A lot of them were put into place because of the damage that was caused before, and we use that framework to kind of navigate and try and not have these things pop up again.
Hi. I teach myself programming, and I think it's like tutorials are really easy. It's like this Hello World stuff. And then I wanted to get into biohacking, and I bought some books, and I still had the feeling after reading it that you need to buy, like, as you said, like enzymes and chemicals and antibiotics you can buy. You don't get into laboratories when the university if you're a new student. So it's like really hard to start. What kind of you recommend for like a beginner to get into it?
Well, it depends on where you live. If you have one of these labs close by to you, maybe you could try there. If you don't, it depends on what you want to work on. If you say you want to work with genetics and you live in Europe, it may be a bit hard. But Europe is famous, at least some countries in Europe are really famous for developing technology. I have some friends in Berlin. They don't have a fully equipped lab, but they work on electronics. So they make machines that could be used by biologists. And this is what is really interesting. You know, we may feel like we have our vision or our project is really important, but sometimes it's really useful to build something that can support someone else's idea. So if you can't do exactly what you have in your mind and you just want to get started and you don't want to spend a lot of money, maybe look into building equipment, because I'm sure at least a few labs will buy it. So you may get some money to start your own experiments.
Actually, that was the idea. I just wanted to run it like one time myself to see what you need and how it's done. But that's the point where I failed, because I thought it's like so difficult, and like you need kind of like a bachelor degree in biology or something.
How advanced was the project that you wanted to do? I mean,
I just bought some book like which has this lab manual inside, and was like 30 or 40 steps, and each of them was quite a lot.
so there's special. So if you want to do, say for example, the DNA extraction workshop, you want to do these things, you can buy the expensive chemicals. Or what we do is we go to a department store and then we look around at the backs of the shampoo and detergent and things like that. So the kit that I have today, if you want to do the workshop, is dish soap, salt, lens cleaning solution from contact lenses. These contain a lot of the chemicals that you would need for an experiment. So maybe you could try and find it. I'm not saying it's there for your experiment, but they can be found in readily available resources. Okay, one last question I hear.
Yes, you mentioned the regulation in the European Union, and you say you do this biohacking in Denmark. What is it that you actually do in the biohacking in Denmark?
So me personally, I focus on technology. So I work with electronics and programming, and I build devices that can be used for people who are growing things. So if you have a strain like the people who did the colored paint, using bacteria, at some point they need to grow this bacteria. And right now, all of the equipment you can find for it is extremely expensive. So just thinking about how to build equipment to support such initiatives. In Denmark, well, The vagina yogurt was one thing. But we work a lot with organisms that can do unique things, but don't require modification to do those unique things. For example, algae, if you can control the light and you can control the movement and other environmental factors, if you can control those factors, you don't really need to modify them. You could just have them grow better. So it's a limitation, but we work around this. The one about moving the small liquids around, that was also started part in Copenhagen. So we focus on the tech to support the biological community, because eventually that's important as well.
Give him an applause, guys. Thank you.